They didn't call me. They didn't warn me. They didn't even wait. My parents sat in a room with lawyers, documents spread across the table, and my brother smiling like everything already belonged to him, and they signed it. My company, the one I built, from nothing, given away, like it was theirs, like I didn't exist. And the worst part? He walked out of that room calling himself the owner, confident, certain, untouchable. But ownership doesn't come from confidence. It comes from control. A few hours later, when the records updated, the name listed as the owner wasn't his. That's when everything changed. My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in Seattle, Washington. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories where calm decisions beat loud reactions, make sure you subscribe and tell me in the comments, would you have stopped them or let it play out? I read every single comment. Now let me take you back. Because this didn't start with that deal. It started the moment they thought I didn't understand control. When I started my company, no one stopped me. That's what made it worse. No one believed in it enough to even try. My parents called it a phase, something temporary, something I would eventually grow out of. My brother Daniel didn't even hide it. How long do you think this will last? Do people actually pay for that? I answered every time. Calm, neutral, not to convince them, but because I already knew something they didn't. I wasn't building something for approval. I was building something I could control. The early days weren't impressive. Late nights, unpaid invoices, small clients, slow progress. There were moments where even I questioned it. But I kept going, because no one was watching. No pressure, no expectations, no interference. And that kind of silence gives you space to build something real. The shift wasn't loud. It never is. One bigger client, then another, then consistent revenue. And suddenly, they started paying attention. My parents stopped asking, "What is this?" and started asking, "How much are you making? How is it structured? Who owns what?" Daniel started showing interest too. Ideas, suggestions, opinions, and I recognized it immediately. Because interest that appears after success is never curiosity. It's positioning. They didn't try to take over. Not directly. That would have been obvious. Instead, they got closer. My father started reviewing documents. My mother suggested financial changes. Daniel joined conversations he was never part of before. On the surface, it looked like support, but I could feel it. The difference between helping something grow and preparing to step into it. Hay believed something simple, that I trusted them completely. That because they were family. They had access, authority, control. And I let them believe it. Because people reveal everything when they think you're not paying attention. And I was paying attention to everything. They focused on what they could see. The brand, the clients, the money. But they never asked the only question that mattered. Who actually controls it? Because while they were watching growth, I was building structure, ownership layers, control rights, decision power, things that don't look important until they are. And by the time they realized it, it was already too late. I didn't find out directly. No one told me. It started with something small, a notification, a document request, an access log that didn't match. Something was happening without me. And when I followed it back, everything became clear. They weren't preparing anymore. They had already decided. They thought my absence meant permission, that if I wasn't there, I wasn't involved, that decisions could be made without resistance. And that was their biggest mistake, because they thought they were taking control, when in reality, They were walking into something I had already designed. The day they signed it, I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. Lawyers, documents, transfers, money moved, signatures placed, and my brother walked out of that room, believing he owned everything, confident, certain, untouchable. And I didn't stop them. That's the part most people don't understand. I didn't interrupt, didn't confront, didn't expose anything. Because sometimes, letting people complete their mistake is more powerful than preventing it. Because I knew something they didn't. The moment the records updated, the truth would appear, and there would be no way to argue it. A few hours after the meeting ended, everything looked normal. No announcements, no messages, no sudden changes. Because deals like that don't become real when they're signed. They become real when the system updates, when records change, when ownership reflects, when data confirms. And there's always a gap, a quiet space, between what people think happened and what actually did. Most people relax in that space. They assume it's done, final, irreversible. But I didn't, because that gap was exactly where the truth lived. Daniel didn't wait. Of course he didn't. He started acting like the owner immediately, calling people, sending instructions, referring to the company as his. Send me the updated reports. I'll handle this from now on. Loop me in on all decisions. His tone had changed. Subtle, but clear. And people responded. Because confidence is convincing, even when it's wrong. By evening, he had stepped fully into the role, reviewing operations, giving direction, positioning himself as authority. From the outside, it looked real, structured, legitimate. But there was one problem. Ownership isn't decided by behavior. It's defined by record. I got the call later that night. Not from my parents, not from Daniel, from inside the company. The voice on the other end was careful, professional, but uncertain. Hey, just wanted to confirm something. They didn't say it directly, but I understood immediately. Something didn't match. So I gave them one answer. Simple, calm. Wait for the records to update. And then I ended the call. Corporate systems don't move instantly. There's a process. Verification, alignment, confirmation. And during that time, two realities exist at once: what people believe and what actually is. Daniel was operating in one. I was waiting in the other. That night, my parents were calm, satisfied, certain. Because from their perspective, everything was done. They had signed, they had transferred, they had decided. The way they always believed they could. Because they still thought this was something they owned. They believed something simple. That action equals outcome. That once something is signed, it's finished. But structure matters more than signatures. Framework matters more than intention. And ownership is not transferred by belief. It's confirmed by system. The next morning, everything was quiet. No calls, no messages, no updates from them, because they were waiting, confidently, for confirmation of what they already believed was true. And I was waiting too, but for a very different reason. There's always a moment, small, invisible, when systems update. No sound, no announcement, just a change. A line adjusted, a field updated, a name confirmed. And that moment changes everything. When the record's finalized, the ownership field updated, clean, clear, undeniable, and the name listed there wasn't Daniel's, wasn't my parents', it was mine. Exactly as it had always been, exactly as I had designed it. And in that second, everything they believed they had taken disappeared. Daniel was the first to see it. Of course he was, because he was waiting, refreshing, checking, expecting confirmation of what he already believed. And when the update appeared, he didn't understand it. Not immediately, because the mind doesn't reject reality right away. It tries to fix it, to reinterpret it, to force it to match expectation. But this time, there was nothing to fix. The name was clear, permanent, undeniable, and it wasn't his. My phone rang minutes later. Daniel. Not confident this time, not relaxed. There was tension in his voice. Controlled, but breaking. I think there's a mistake. Not a question. Not yet. A statement trying to protect itself. I didn't answer immediately, because silence, in moments like this, forces truth to surface. He kept going, explaining what they had done, what they signed, how everything was final, repeating it, like repetition could turn it into reality. Because when belief collapses, people try to rebuild it with words. And I listened, calm, still, because everything he said only confirmed one thing. They never understood what they were signing. When he finally stopped talking, I asked one question. Did you read the full ownership structure? Silence. Not long, but enough. Because that question wasn't about documents. It was about understanding. And I already knew the answer. I read what mattered. He said it quickly. Defensive now. Trying to regain control. But that's where it broke. Because what he thought mattered wasn't what actually defined ownership. And that gap between reading and understanding is where everything collapses. I structured it differently. Calm, clear, final. No transfer overrides controlling interest. That's all I said. No long explanation, no technical breakdown. Because truth doesn't need decoration, just precision. He didn't respond. Because now, he wasn't reacting from confidence. He was thinking, replaying everything, rechecking, recalculating. And slowly, the realization began. Not fully, but enough to feel it. That something had gone very wrong. At this point, be honest. Would you have stopped them earlier? Or let them walk straight into their mistake like this? Comment below. I read every single one. A few seconds later, another voice joined. My mother. Then my father. Their tone had changed. Not calm. Not aggressive. Controlled tension. We signed everything, my father said. Firm. Certain. And that's when I realized they still thought this was about paperwork. You signed what you were allowed to sign. I said it slowly, clearly, and that sentence ended everything. Because it introduced something they never considered. Limits, structure, boundaries they couldn't cross. For the first time, they weren't explaining anything to me. They were trying to understand something from me. And that shift is everything. Because control isn't about speaking louder. It's about who holds clarity. And in that moment, they realized something they never expected. They were never in control. Not even for a second. The calls didn't stop. People inside the company started noticing. Instructions were coming from Daniel, but systems weren't responding. Permissions weren't updating. Access wasn't transferring. And that kind of disconnect creates doubt faster than any argument. Daniel kept trying, sending emails, giving instructions, acting like nothing had changed. But something had. People weren't responding the same way. Not ignoring him, but not following either. Because authority without access is just noise. No one confronted him. They didn't need to. They adjusted. Quietly. Instead of acting, They started verifying, double-checking, confirming, and slowly, everything started routing back to me. Not officially, but clearly. My parents stepped in, trying to stabilize things, calling people, reassuring them, positioning Daniel as the owner, using tone, confidence, authority, everything that had always worked before, but not this time, because this wasn't emotional, this was structural. And structure doesn't respond to confidence, it responds to truth. Someone finally asked it, if he owns it, why doesn't the system reflect that? Simple, direct, impossible to ignore. And suddenly, everything they were saying needed proof. No one answered, because there was no answer, not one that could override reality. And in that silence, authority shifted again. More clearly this time, because doubt had turned into understanding. Daniel felt it, not all at once, but enough. Enough to notice the hesitation, the delay, the lack of response. Because when people stop following you, you feel it before you understand it. If you've ever been underestimated like this and stayed quiet until the right moment, you already understand this feeling. Tell me honestly, would you have exposed everything immediately or waited like this? By now, nothing they said held weight, not because they stopped talking, but because reality was already visible, functioning, proving something else. That's when it hit them. Not emotionally, not dramatically, structurally. They hadn't taken anything. They hadn't transferred anything. They hadn't controlled anything. They had signed documents. That gave them nothing. And just like that, everything collapsed. Not loudly, not publicly, but completely. Because once authority breaks and doesn't recover, it doesn't come back. And in that moment, they understood something they never expected. They were never in control, not even for a second. It didn't collapse all at once. That's not how control breaks. It happens in small moments, subtle shifts, quiet resistance. The first real crack didn't come from them. It came from inside the company. People started asking questions, not loudly, not aggressively, but carefully, because something didn't match. Instructions were coming from Daniel, but authority wasn't aligning. And when authority doesn't align, people stop trusting it. Daniel kept pushing forward. Emails, calls, decisions, acting like nothing had changed, but something had. The system wasn't recognizing him. Access denied, permissions restricted, approvals not validating. And that's when reality became visible. Because systems don't care about confidence, they only reflect truth. Inside the company, no one made a scene, no one challenged him directly, but the energy shifted. People slowed down, paused, verified. Instead of following, they started checking, and every check led back to me, quietly, naturally, like control had never left. My parents tried to step in again, calling key people, reassuring them, rebuilding the narrative. He's the owner. This is just a delay. Everything is under control. They used tone, confidence, authority, the same tools that always worked before, but something had changed. Because this wasn't about belief anymore, it was about structure, and structure doesn't respond to pressure. Then it happened. One simple question. If he owns it, why doesn't the system reflect it? Silence, because that question couldn't be redirected, couldn't be explained away. And in that moment, everything they said lost weight. Right here, this moment. When everything starts falling apart, what would you do? Would you step in and take control immediately, or stay silent and let it collapse on its own? Comment below. I read every single one. People started stepping back. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. Enough to show something had changed. The same people who listened to them before were now watching, not following, observing. And when people stop following you, control is already gone. Daniel felt it first. That hesitation, that delay, that resistance. Because when authority disappears, you don't hear it. You feel it. And there's nothing louder than that. We should just move forward, Daniel said, trying to hold control, trying to push through the gap. But his voice was different, less certain, more forced. Because this wasn't leadership anymore. It was recovery. And there's a difference. My parents tried one last time, explaining it as delay, technical issue, temporary error, but no one followed it, because reality was already visible, already working, already proving something else. And once people see that, they don't go back. That's when it fully hit them. Not emotionally, structurally. They hadn't taken anything. They hadn't transferred anything. They hadn't controlled anything. They had acted inside a system they didn't understand. And that system never changed. And just like that, everything they built in that moment collapsed. Not loudly, not publicly, but completely. Because once control breaks and truth replaces it, there's no way back. I didn't step in immediately. I didn't need to. Because the system had already done it for me. Everything was already aligned. Decisions, access, authority. Still exactly where I left them. And that's the difference most people don't understand. Control isn't something you take back. It's something you never lose. I didn't take control back immediately. That's what most people expect. A meeting, an announcement, a correction, something loud. But I didn't do any of that. Because I didn't need to. The system had already spoken. And when truth is visible, you don't need to explain it. I stayed quiet. And that silence did something powerful. It removed confusion. It removed resistance. Because when people figure something out themselves, they trust it more. No pressure, no argument, no forcing control, just alignment. And slowly, everything returned to where it had always been. Decisions came back to me, not because I asked, because they knew. Questions came back to me. Approvals came back to me. Authority came back to me. Not loudly, naturally. Because real control doesn't need to prove itself. Daniel called again. But this time, he wasn't the same. No confidence, no authority, just clarity. I didn't know. That's all he said. And for the first time, he wasn't trying to lead. He was trying to understand. I could have explained it all. Every structure, every layer, every protection I built. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about teaching him. It was about something else. Understanding limits. So I said only one thing. You never had ownership to begin with. And I ended the call. Be honest. If you were in my place, would you have explained everything to them? Or kept it simple like this? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. My parents didn't call, not immediately, and that silence said everything. Because for the first time, they had nothing to say. No explanation, no justification, no control. Only reality. Things didn't explode after that. They didn't need to. There was no argument, no dramatic ending, just distance. Clear, quiet, permanent. Because once people realize they can't control you, they stop trying. That's when I understood something deeper. Ownership isn't just legal, it's strategic. It's about what you build and how well you protect it, how clearly you define boundaries, and how quietly you prepare for moments no one else sees coming. They thought they had won, sitting in that room, signing those papers, moving money, watching everything shift. But what they didn't understand was that they were acting inside a system they didn't create, didn't understand, and couldn't control. I didn't expose them. I didn't embarrass them. I didn't correct them publicly, because I didn't need to. The outcome spoke for itself. And sometimes, that's the most powerful response. Letting people see what their actions actually lead to, without interference, without explanation. If you've ever been in a situation like this, where people underestimated you, and you proved them wrong without saying much, I want to hear it. Drop your story in the comments. Looking back now, they didn't try to take my company. They tried to take control of something they never understood. And that's why it failed. Because control doesn't come from assumption. It comes from structure, preparation, patience. And in the end, the real owner wasn't revealed in a fight. It was revealed in a system that never changed. They thought they had taken everything, but they didn't realize one thing. I never gave them control. If this story made you think differently, share it with someone who needs this mindset. And tell me in the comments, would you have stopped them early or let them walk into their own mistake? I read every single comment. And there's another story waiting for you on your screen. I'll see you there.